So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the BPI webinar number 5 inside BPI certification, the process behind verifying packaging's compostability. On behalf of BPI and myself, we're excited to be here with you all. I'm very grateful to our presenters for donating their time to increase education on this really important topic. Thank you, Emily McGill with the Compostable Field Testing Program, Chris Ecker with OWS, and Margaret Eldridge with BPI. We'll continue our journey today of certified compostable food service packaging as we move along its life cycle. This is our 5th webinar in this 7-part series. We're going to learn from the 3 of them who I am very sure they have spent thousands of hours working on this very topic in a very deep level, and you'll get to hear from those in charge of testing the products, reviewing the data, certifying the products. It's a unique chance to hear from them directly, ask them questions during the Q&A. I'm very excited to hear their presentations and then get into that Q&A part of the webinar. My name is Jorge Montezuma, and I'm Principal Consultant for Wanu Organics, a consulting firm working to expand composting infrastructure across the country. I've been working with BPI on this for over a year, and I'll be serving as the moderator. We'll start off with a brief background on BPI, give a quick overview of the 7-part webinar series, and then hear from our presenters, and then wrap up with some Q&A. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and published online except for the Q&A portion, so definitely stick around. We'll record the Q&A portion, but it'll just be for internal education purposes for BPI at a later time. You're also welcome to ask any questions you want on the Q&A chat. There's a chat box, so you can use that. And the answers may come in while other speakers are presenting. And if we don't get to them, we'll get to them during the formal Q&A after the presentations wrap up. Now I'm going to hand it off to the BPI Marketing and Communications Director, Leslie Rogers, to tell us more about BPI.
Thank you so much, Jorge. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. BPI was founded in 1999, and we are the leading authority on compostable products and packaging. We are a 501c6 membership-based organization of stakeholders. We have a vision, and our vision is a world without organic waste. Our mission is to support the shift to the circular bioeconomy by advancing policy, standards, research, and science-based verification of compostability and biodegradability. We have 3 core objectives. The first is claims. We want to advance trusted and scientifically based standards, research, and claims. Adoption. We work to align and collaborate the stakeholders across the value chain to advance BPI's mission. And policy. We work hard to influence policy that supports a systems-based approach to products and materials. Again, thank you so much, if I may, to our presenters. Coming a month after the summit, this information is very timely, and I couldn't ask for more perfect presenters to talk about this. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Leslie. So this is what the journey looks like. We're devoting single webinars to various portions of the life cycle, working our way backwards. We launched the series with using compost made with certified compostable products, and we'll end it with how the products are made. Recordings for all of these are on the website, and I encourage you to check them out if you haven't already. Today, we'll explore how compostability claims are verified through the BPI certification process. You'll learn what it takes to become BPI certified with both testing at the lab and the process BPI undertakes to ensure materials are meeting the required criteria and standards. We'll also learn about field-based compostability test methods and their role in the industry in the future. The last 2 webinars will be in November and January, and we'll focus on compostable bioplastics and fiber products and how they're made. Throughout this series, we seek to highlight successful programs and best management practices that could be used to improve other programs and operations throughout the country and maybe the world as well. So now I'm going to pass it off to Margaret. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if you could start sharing your screen, that would be great. She's our first speaker, and she joined BPI in 2020 and manages the people and process behind BPI certifications. She brings over 2 decades of recycling and waste reduction experience, with her previous role being the executive director of the Virginia Recycling Association. Excited to have you join us here today, Margaret. Passing it off to you now.
I'm pleased to be here, and welcome everyone. I'm going to start off by telling you about BPI certification, and then we'll talk a little bit about the details of lab testing, and Emily will finish things out with talking about field testing. So BPI has offered a certification program for commercial compostability for over 25 years. And we're really excited to announce the addition of a home compostability certification with the launch of our new commercial and home compostability program in December of this year. Currently, there are over 53,000 products certified for commercial compostability by BPI, and these are included on about 2,100 certificates that are held by over 900 companies. This slide gives you an idea of the types of products that BPI certifies, which fall into several main categories. Agricultural, which is things like plant pots and tags, growing medium, mulch films. Bags that could be carryout bags, Ziploc bags, pastry bags, different types of bags. Resins and ingredients that are used to make compostable materials and products. Food packaging, food serviceware, and pet waste products. This graphic shows BPI's certification process. I'll quickly walk you through the basic process, which is the same for both commercial only and commercial and home certifications. And as we just saw, BPI certifies basic materials like resins, ingredients that are used to add specific properties to items like colorants or adhesives, and finished products. So before starting the certification process, an item must be eligible for certification. BPI's eligibility criteria are focused through the lens of compostable products as a means to an end to get desirable feedstocks to composters and to keep organics out of landfills. Therefore, the item must be associated with desirable organics like food scraps or yard trimmings that are collected for composting. We don't certify things like e-commerce mailers or toothbrushes or phone cases, even though they could technically be made compostable. They don't help divert desirable organics to composters. The item can't be a redesign of something that's a better fit for recycling. It's based on existing demand, infrastructure, and consumer awareness. And a water bottle is a great example of this. While it could be made of a compostable material, people are used to putting those in their recycling bin, and it would confuse composters, MRFs, and people when they finish drinking their water. Third, the item cannot require disassembly in order to be composted. A coffee pod is a great example here. All elements of a coffee pod must be compostable for it to be certified by BPI. The item itself must be labeled with the BPI certification mark unless the item has a category level exemption in place. And that could be through printing, embossing, etching. We don't dictate how the mark is placed on the item, just that it's there. And then finally, BPI was an industry leader in banning the intentional addition of PFAS in certified compostables. So once an item is determined to be eligible, we can start the certification process. To do this, a company fills out an application form that includes the formulation listing every ingredient from every supplier used to make the item. They submit safety data sheets for each ingredient in that formulation. They sign a CDA with BPI since they'll be divulging trade secrets to us. And they also sign a statement of no intentionally added PFAS, saying that they are not intentionally adding PFAS to their compostable item. So our certification is guided by our certification schemes. We have one for our commercial only certification that's based on ASTM standards for compostability, and our new scheme for home compostability certification that's based on the French home compostability standard. These schemes are used to determine the tests required for BPI certification. The commercial scheme is available on our website for anyone to review, and the home scheme is available to BPI members currently and will be publicly available when we launch our home compostability certification program on December 1st. We contract with TÜV Rheinland and Circto, which is a third-party technical reviewer who determines the tests that are required for certification based on the formulation of the product and the guidance in the standards and our test scheme. And so we have confidence in the test results. The tests conducted for compostability must be conducted by a lab like OWS, who's here presenting today, whose abilities have been verified through either ISO accreditation or an equivalency audit that allows them to be approved to conduct testing for BPI certification. We have a global network of over 35 labs who are approved to conduct commercial testing. I think we've got 18 labs, 19 labs that are approved to conduct testing for our home certification. DINCERCO, the third party technical reviewer, verifies the attributes of the samples that were tested and reviews the test reports and data from the lab during the conformity assessment to determine if an item meets the technical requirements for certification. And kind of in parallel, while the technical review is taking place, BPI staff reviews layouts of product and packaging artwork to ensure that the use of the BPI certification mark meets the terms of our license agreement. The company enters into a licensing agreement with BPI that gives them the right and restrictions to use the BPI certification mark to market their certified item. And once items successfully complete the certification process, the company receives a certificate that lists the products that are covered by the certification by SKU. These products are also listed by SKU in our searchable online catalog. And this resource makes it really easy to verify if an item is certified and to find particular products that carry certification. Next, I'll give you a brief overview of the technical components behind BPI certification for both commercial and home certificates. Now, this is relevant because BPI requires home certified products to also be commercially certified for technical, legal, reputational, and mission-driven reasons. This means you can't certify a product for just home compostability. So ASTM D6400, which is a commercial certification standard, will continue to be the baseline certification for all BPI certified products and materials. So often when people think about compostability, they're only thinking about the testing requirements to meet the compostability standards. But for BPI certification, there are two sets of criteria that items must meet. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see the core criteria as outlined by the standards for compostability. And on the right-hand side, you see the additional requirements that BPI imposes on top of the standards. First, let's quickly walk through the testing requirements for the ASTM standards for commercial compostability. And I'll highlight this differences between commercial and home requirements in the next slide. So at a very high level, and again, Chris is going to go into much greater detail about this, but this will be kind of an introduction. So at a very high level, there are three general categories of tests that products must go through. The first is disintegration, and that looks at the physical and visual breakdown of the finished item. The ASTM standard requires 90% disintegration in 84 days, and the home compostability standard requires 90% in 180 days. Next is biodegradation, and that looks at the finished product and the ingredients and raw materials that are used to make that product to ensure that the carbon in the product and the ingredients can be completely used as food by the microorganisms in compost. This is measured as conversion into carbon dioxide, and the standard requires 90% conversion in 180 days for commercial compostability and 360 days for home. And finally, the third set of tests makes sure that composting the item won't have any harmful impacts on the compost itself or in the environment where that compost is applied. These tests include plant toxicity, where plants are grown from seed and compost made from the product, and compared with plants grown in the same compost that's made without adding the compostable product, and regulated metals tests and tests for fluorine to screen for PFAS. And then on the right-hand side are the additional requirements that BPI has for certification. Our eligibility requirements, our ban on intentionally added PFAS, and the requirement that certified products and their packaging bear the certification mark. Since the home certification is layered on top of the commercial certification, there are more similarities than differences between the two programs. And the differences are really centered around the different operating conditions and subsequent biological environments that are typically found in the two different composting environments. Commercial compost facilities typically run hot and fast under thermophilic conditions, while backyard bins are run at a smaller scale with less active management. So the composting process is typically slower and cooler under mesophilic conditions. So eligibility criteria between the two programs is identical, except for pet waste products are limited to commercial only certification, since backyard bins don't typically get hot enough to kill the pathogens in pet waste. The laboratory tests used to certify products for the two environments are also reflective of the varying conditions found in the different compost environments. Disintegration testing for commercial certification is conducted at high temperatures between 113 and 167 degrees Fahrenheit for a maximum of 84 days. And as I said, reflective of the conditions in a home compost bin, home certification disintegration testing is conducted at a much lower temperature between 73 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit for a much longer period of time, for up to 180 days. So this means that two different disintegration tests must be conducted for certification, one under commercial conditions and one under the home conditions. The differences are similar for biodegradation testing. For commercial testing, the test is run at 132 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for 6 months, while for home, it's run between 73 and 80 degrees for up to 1 year. So another difference is with ecotoxicity testing. The French standard, and therefore BPI's program, since it's standards-based, requires ecotoxicity testing in compost that's generated by the ISO 16929 disintegration test method, whereas commercial testing allows the compost to be generated by either ISO disintegration test method, as long as the concentration of items at the start of testing with 2200 meet the requirements of 16929. This is because ISO 16929 includes specific methodology to address creating compost for ecotoxicity testing, while 2200 does not. BPI has incorporated this requirement, so our scheme is no less rigorous than the standard on which it's based. Finally, there's some differences in the allowable thresholds of regulated metals between the two certificates. The thresholds in the home standard and scheme are lower for arsenic, cadmium, chromium, molybdenum, that's such a difficult word to say, lead, nickel, selenium, and zinc. The thresholds for copper and fluorine are the same in both standards and schemes, and the commercial standards and schemes have lower thresholds for cobalt and mercury. So products being certified for commercial and home must meet the lower thresholds. So Chris, I'm going to hand things over to Chris, who will be covering the testing required for certification in detail in the next presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Margaret. Chris, if you want to pull up your, Margaret, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and then Chris can share his screen. I'll do an introduction here. Chris is the managing director at Normec OWS. In 2020, when OWS decided to reopen the testing lab in Dayton, Ohio, he traveled to Belgium to learn the company and returned to the US to open up the lab with the former general manager. The lab was originally focused solely on testing biodegradability in compost, but has since expanded to test biodegradation in soil, disintegration under home composting conditions, disintegration under simulated industrial composting conditions, developed a field-scale home compostable assessment for certified home compostable products, and will soon expand to offer ISO 16929 and ecotoxicity testing. He's got a bachelor's and master's in microbiology from the Ohio State University and has worked for the U.S. Geological Survey and the Air Force Research Lab. His work includes research support to many projects dealing with surface and groundwater throughout the U.S. and investigations on the degradation of various polymers by bacterial and fungal isolates. He lives in Dayton with his wife and daughter and 3 dogs. Thanks, Chris. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. You can see my slides okay here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to go into a little bit more of the laboratory testing. So thank you very much, Margaret, for giving that brief overview of everything. And we're going to get right into this. So really, when we think about the BPI Compostable logo, we really want to talk more about what's behind the actual logo in terms of the work that's performed in the laboratory to make these certified products. And for us, it really comes down to 2 broad categories. We look at the degradation aspect and also the environmental safety component of these products. And to address both of those questions, 4 key tests are performed in the lab, as Margaret mentioned. We have a biodegradation test, the disintegration test, the ecotoxicity test, as well as measuring those regulated elements in these finished items. So the first most straightforward test to discuss is the regulated elements. So for us in the lab, we take the finished item or raw resin or whatever material is seeking that certification. The material is digested using a microwave digestion method. It's run through spectrophotometry, where all of the regulated heavy metals and fluorine are analyzed and the concentrations are determined. Brief table here just showing the regional differences across from a few regions of the world, different levels of regulated metals that are set for Europe, the US, and Canada. And here in Normec OWS, we actually will measure the amount of heavy metals in a raw material, and we can do some calculations to determine that maximum concentration that an item can be used in a finished product in order to be below these threshold levels. Typically, when we're looking at the heavy metals content, we're dealing with pigments and products that have coloration in them. That's generally speaking where the heavy metals content comes from in these items. Along with this material characteristics, we also perform FTIR analysis, so we can validate that chemical fingerprint of all of the materials, and that allows for traceability over time. It allows for routine screening of those products to ensure that the chemical composition of that product hasn't changed over time during that manufacturing process. The second part of this associated with environmental safety is the ecotoxicity portion. And really, you can assess ecotoxicity by 2 means. BPI requires the toxicity test be performed with 2 different plant species. Other regions of the world also consider earthworms. Again, similar to the plant species, you expose the earthworms to compost that's created with a test item, and you look for a negative effect on those earthworms. And really, the compost that's created during this process cannot do any harm at all to any living organisms. And that's a very important point. So we always compare these to control materials, which is compost that's produced with, in the absence of a test material, and we look at the difference in performance of that compost. What I really want to highlight here is the stringency of this testing. When we make compost for ecotoxicity, we do that with a 10% input concentration of the test material, which is a very high concentration. And to give a quick example of that, using a coffee capsule example, a typical coffee capsule weighs about 1.5 grams on dry weight basis. In order to make compost at a 10% input concentration, that requires the addition of over 5,000 coffee capsules be added into 80 kilograms of bio-waste, which is equivalent to about 30 capsules per day per person of coffee. That's a tremendous amount of coffee for any individual to actually consume and then put all of those capsules into a composting environment. So it's a very high input concentration. Visually, this is what a 10% input concentration looks like. So the picture on the left here shows 1.1 kilograms of test material added into 11 kilograms of fresh bio-waste. And you can see from this picture, this is well exceeding a typical concentration of material that would exist in a real commercial composting facility. And the point that I'm trying to make in all of this is that the laboratory testing stringency is much greater than those conditions that actually exist in real-world commercial composting facilities. So now we'll get into the degradation aspect of things. And the first point that we're going to talk about is the biodegradation. And for us, biodegradation, the definition of biodegradation for BPI certification and to be in line with ASTM D6400 and ASTM D5338 is the conversion of organic carbon to carbon dioxide. There's lots of other measurements and ways to assess biodegradation, but for our purposes and the work that we do, that's the definition that we work off of. And again, to show a visual, to show that, again, the stringency of the laboratory testing, this is a typical test setup for us in the laboratory where we take 1.2 kilograms of compost inoculum, the fine fraction or the fraction that's less than 5 millimeters in particle size, plus 80 grams of test material. And this is an example of the mixture that you obtain that's actually used in the biodegradation test. So again, Similar to the compost production for ecotoxicity, it's a very high input concentration that's being evaluated on the laboratory side of things. As Margaret mentioned, the pass level for commercial compostability is biodegradation of 90% within 180 days. What this means is 90% of that organic carbon present in the test substrate has been converted to carbon dioxide within that 180 days. And we want to point out that the stringency in the criteria for certification is actually stricter than nature. So here's some other examples of some natural materials that would, of course, also be added to a commercial composting facility. Things like wood fibers only degrading 71% in 728 days, all the way down to pine needles, which only degrade by about 52% in 1 year. So the actual criteria for biodegradation as set forth in ASTM D6400 and also the BPI certification scheme is actually much stricter than nature. So we get this question a lot, and that's why is it 90% biodegradation and not 100% biodegradation? And to answer that question, we really have to consider the biochemical pathway by which biodegradation is occurring. So in very simple terms, the carbon that's present in the substrate or polymer of interest in the presence of oxygen gets converted to carbon dioxide, water, residual carbon, and biomass. That residual carbon can be intermediate degradation products, and the carbon also goes to biomass growth. Again, if you put this amount of material into compost, the microbes that are present, the bacteria and fungi that are present in that compost inoculum, will also be using that as a food source to grow and multiply and divide. So in short, not all of the carbon in the polymer can be expected to be converted to carbon dioxide, but through the course of this testing, we can be confident that that remaining 10% would be non-persistent microparticles, degradation byproducts or intermediate degradation products, and biomass. And so that's why we focus on a 90% criteria and not a 100% criteria. Again, to show the increasing stringency as these standards have developed over time. In the early 2000s, the first standard, which was EN 13432, just set a flat 90% pass level for that biodegradation aspect. In the 2010s, standards were updated to reflect the requirement that any ingredients present in a finished item in a concentration of 1 to 10% needed to be tested separately for biodegradability. And the reason for that is you didn't want to have a material that was made of 90% biodegradable product, but 10% something that was completely not biodegradable, which could contribute significantly to microplastics accumulation and just in general not be biodegradable. The ingredients that were less than 1% concentration were exempt from testing, but the sum of those ingredients needed to be less than 5% in total in the finished item. If we fast forward to today, we are now considering, or it is going to be changed, I believe in 2026, to a new criteria, which is that ingredients present in a concentration of 1 to 15% will need to be tested individually. And again, the sum of those ingredients less than 1% will decrease to be no more than 3%. So again, just reflecting the increasing stringency over time of these laboratory tests. And then the last test is our disintegration test. Unlike biodegradation, disintegration is the physical falling apart of this material in compost. So now we're not looking at the conversion of organic carbon to carbon dioxide. We are looking at the physical falling apart of this material in compost. We do this under pilot scale composting conditions, ISO 16929, or the smaller version, which is simulated composting conditions under ISO 20200. This has an input concentration of 1%. The compost is incubated for 84 days or 12 weeks. And at the end of that period, all of the contents of the compost is sieved over 2 millimeters, and the entire contents is sorted through, and individual pieces of material are looked for. Again, pass criteria, 90% of that material must pass through a 2 millimeter sieve within 12 weeks, with two bullet points here that are worth commenting on: colored particles and also insufficiently degraded components. So those very brightly colored items with a lot of coloration in them, even if all of the material passes through that 2 millimeter sieve, but you can still see a lot of brightly colored item in that fine fraction, that's still going to be an issue for certification because we don't want to see that in the finished compost. Similarly, for insufficiently disintegrated components, if you can, even if a material has reached the 90% mark, but you can still identify a discrete component of an item that has not disintegrated, that will also represent a problem for certification. A couple examples on that would be the vacuum seals on coffee bags, or we also had an example of coffee capsules where the rim of the coffee capsule remained after the 84 weeks. All the rims of the coffee capsules remained, even though the material had reached that 90% disintegration mark. And again, to show that comparison with nature, nature needs time as well. So these are two pictures of some straw, again, something that would always be incorporated into compost, and an ear of corn. And this is what they achieved in commercial composting after just 8 weeks of composting. So again, we just don't want to set the precedent that these materials will disintegrate within 4 weeks of being added to commercial composting. These processes all take time. And finally, just to quickly touch on the lab testing versus the field testing, what does laboratory testing get you? It really is a proof of an inherent characteristic. Proof of biodegradability and disintegration, has high accuracy and reproducibility, where the test material is truly the only variable and all other conditions of the test have been fixed. It allows for comparisons over time, comparison between items, and it's really the gold standard for certification and for validating claims. By contrast, field testing, which Emily is going to talk more about, really gives the legitimacy to that laboratory testing. So that's taking that product, putting it in real world conditions, whether it's commercial or home composting conditions, to evaluate the performance of that material. And with that, our contact information for Normec OWS is on this slide. Feel free to get in touch with us for any additional questions. And with that, I will hand things over to Emily.
Thanks, Chris. Have some background noise. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Background noise. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks so much, Chris. Now we have Emily's. Great. Yeah, before moving to Emily, I just really liked on Margaret's presentation the schemes being publicly available and the additional requirements aside from the standards, the ASTM standards. And Chris, it's just really nice to see a lot of those pictures and to kind of like take a deeper dive into the lab. So thanks for sharing that. Next we have Emily McGill. She's the program director of the Compostable Field Testing Program, CFTP, a nonprofit open source international research project into how certified compostable products break down in real world composting conditions. CFTP promotes science-based answers to the challenges that compostable products face. With a Bachelor of Bioresource Engineering and a passion for collaboration, Emily takes a systemic cross-sector lens to work on solutions for a more circular and regenerative economy. She's been investigating the intersection of composting and compostable packaging since 2013. Thanks again for being here, Emily. Looking forward to what you have to share. Passing it off to you now.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about the program. Jorge already introduced me. I'm the program director for the Compostable Field Testing Program. I'm calling in from Coast Salish territory in Vancouver, British Columbia, the ancestral lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam people. Jorge already mentioned that we're nonprofit, open source, science-based. What he didn't emphasize is that we're really collaborative. The CFTP is a really unique research program. It was originally founded by the Compost Research and Education Foundation and BSI Biopackaging Solutions. We conceived this as a data gathering platform where any composter anywhere could field test using consistent, rigorous methods and assess the same compostable products across different sites, then report on both disintegration and composting conditions so that we can start to move beyond just lab-based testing to tease apart what leads to effective breakdown in the real world. As Christopher mentioned, field testing is just a way to check what's happening in real world facilities for items that are already proven to biodegrade, disintegrate, and not be ecotoxic through lab-based certifications. We've been field testing since 2013, and it's been a really grassroots effort, I've got to tell you. We've got support from about 14 plus additional organizations doing donations of cash, data, or in-kind time, and more than 40 composters and advisors contributing data. Now, if you haven't encountered field testing in detail before, what does it consist of? To contrast with the highly controlled lab testing we heard about, to field test, you take intact food service packaging samples, mix them with raw feedstocks, load into a compost pile or system, monitor the composting conditions like temperature, moisture, and pH and maturity. Then at the end of the composting process, we field test straight through curing as often as possible. You gather the test item residuals by sifting them through a screen, analyzing them, and then assessing the results. This is different than the lab in many ways. One of the really tangible ones is that the screen size used in the lab is 2 millimeters, but the screen size used in the field is 1/4 inch. Now, in addition to this overall process for field testing, there's actually 2 branches of the methods depending on whether you contain the test items or you load them loosely into a pile. The most common method that's been used since the 90s is the mesh bag. It allows a lot more precise disintegration results on an item by item basis, but the dose method is necessary when agitation makes mesh bags impossible, like in a lot of in-vessel systems. The mesh bag method is a lot cheaper, way lower labor costs. We've got 22 mesh bag trials and 5 dose trials under our belts, but the dose method is becoming more popular. Now, with the Compostable Field Testing Program, we are not seeking and haven't been to certify products, but to understand how disintegration varies across different compost sites. What products have we tested? Well, over the years, we've covered 82 different item types, so straws, cups, plates, bags, pouches, that cover 23 material categories, everything from PLA to PHA, paper, bagasse, wheat fiber, etc. You can loosely categorize these as, lined or unlined fiber, rigid or flexible biopolymers, and then a whole bunch of different positive controls. Now, we've had about 13 different baseline products that have been tested across many different facilities, and the rest are custom products that composters have opted to analyze. Now, although this does represent a titanic effort, we've tested over 30,000 items across, close to 30 compost sites, and methods have ranged from aerated static pile to windrow and combinations, everything in between, and sites as small as 5 tons up to over 160 tons per year. It's still a relatively small sample size given the diversity of the facilities who've participated. Each facility is as different as a fingerprint. We do need more data and more statistical significance. So take what I'm saying today as outcomes that suggest directions for future research. But let's get into the takeaways of the program so far. Firstly, compostable products do break down under the right composting conditions. Every single item that we've tested across different facilities has showed 0% residuals, aka 100% disintegration, in at least one field trial. Next, the right conditions differ greatly by material type. I'll explain this further shortly. The field test methods themselves, as I alluded to, continue to be improved and standardized. Just this year, we finally published both the contained method and the dose method under ASTM with major support from BPI over the years. And the data does reveal broad stroke recommendations for composters. We're not yet at the level of granularity that we can prescribe the ideal composting conditions for different material types, but I do think we're headed in that direction. Now, it's easy to talk about these results. We've been hearing anecdotal conclusions like this for years, but a picture says 1,000 words. Don't take my word for it. Starting with looking at a fiber product result for a compost facility that ran a test for 84 days using 5 bag replicates, the mesh bag method. This was a covered windrow facility. The top photo is day 0, the bottom photo is day 84. On the left, you have a paper box, which by and large stuck around by the end of the trial, whereas on the right, you have PLA-lined bagasse bowl that showed a pretty good disintegration trajectory. On the biopolymer side of things, and this is at the same compost facility, top you have day 0, bottom day 84, the PLA cold cup, the hot cup lid, and cutlery, all of which are PLA, which is the most commonly tested biopolymer, but different formats based on thinness, rigidity, and heat stability. They all disappeared. So what's going on? We've tested the exact same certified product across different facilities and even in the same facility and seen breakdown differ across sites and across material types. Well, you can explore the results to draw some of your own conclusions. The intention has always been to publish and open source the data. And as of 2024, you can now go to compostabletesting.org/results/explore. Let me show you what you'll see on that page. Now, CFTP is committed to transparency and making our field testing data freely accessible to the public. This is a first stab at that in a box and whisker plot. I do not want to take you back to high school math class today, but I will point out some features of the dashboard that you can explore on your own. So firstly, you can mouse over the box plot to see values. You can edit the axes, break the big blocks you see down into more specific materials or product types using the display options. And you can filter the data that's shown based on the item filters or the operation filters based on composting method, temperature, average temperatures or moisture, and then the duration. You can scroll down on that page to understand better what you're seeing with the box plots. But what I want to point out is that when you're interpreting percent residuals, which is what this graph is showing, the lower the values, the more it's broken down. So biopolymers in the center here, the yellow, have broken down more or less all the time across field trials. When you're interpreting a box and whisker plot, the wider the plot is, so the extent of the box plus the whiskers shows higher variability. So you can see that for fiber materials, there's high variability from 100% disintegration to 0%, but that more or less they're staying around. And the positive controls are all over the map. We've tested things as different as a craft paper bag, a butcher wrap, and an orange peel. So that's why. Now, why? Why this level of variability? It comes down to the question we've been asking from the beginning around composting conditions. Here's a different graph that you can't find on our website yet. This is showing temperature over time. And every line that you see on the graph is a different facility with a different field trial. This is very interesting. Compost facilities are not labs. They understandably have very different conditions between each other. The complication this presents for compostable products is that we generally see that biopolymers tend to want temperatures between 140 or over 150 to accelerate breakdown, whereas fiber really needs moderate to low temperatures and high moisture with longer durations, because the breakdown for fiber is largely driven by fungi. For all compostable products, agitation and pre-grinding helps all the materials, but it's no point asking a composter to pre-grind if they're dealing with massive amounts of contamination. So field testing has gotten us to basically confirm the anecdotal evidence that we've been hearing from composters for years. And before I close out, I do just want to reiterate that compostable packaging and all the research and certification that we're talking about today is not going to solve the problem of food waste. And even if in this dumpster bin that you can see in the film Just Eat It, every hummus package was compostable, I still don't think that this is the best use case for compostable packaging. And so of course, we have to be talking about reduce and reuse as well. That being said, in the limited space where compostable packaging can make a real difference, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is open source information. I think we're past the time where proprietary testing and proprietary results is going to move the dial. And so please do, if you have the capacity, share your results of your disintegration tests and your field tests. Thanks so much. If you want to know what we're up to next with the Compostable Field Testing Program, go to our site and check out the /fundraiser page, and looking forward to answering your questions.
Thanks, Emily. I'll remind everybody, if you have any questions, please add them on the Q&A chat, not the regular chat. We'll try to scroll through them on our next section here. Let me share my screen again. I should have said this before Emily presented, but the Margaret's and Chris's presentation, that marks the current BPI certification requirements and standards, etc. The information that Emily presented is outside of that, but it's related to all of this. So I just wanted to make that distinction there. So thanks so much, Emily. We're gonna move into the Q&A section now. And I'm going to wrap up the webinar by by inviting everybody to join us on webinar number 6 next month as we explore from raw materials to products, how certified compostable bioplastics are made. And it's going to be on November 19th at noon Eastern Time. You can visit bpiworld.org/webinars to find previous recordings and register for the next ones. Somebody asked if these slides will be shared. They will not, but the recording will be available, so you can, I guess, take screenshots if you want of the video. So thank you so much. Let's stop this recording and we'll start the other one for the Q&A section.